At 71, Ruth Macklin had $47 in her coat pocket, a canvas tote bag with a broken strap, and 3 days to vacate the house she had lived in for 38 years. The papers had been filed in October. The sale closed on a Thursday. Her son Gerald and her daughter Patrice had handled all of it from a distance. Phone calls, DocuSign, a notary who came to the house while Ruth was at her Thursday morning card group. By the time she came home that afternoon, the lockbox was already on the front door handle. She didn't know what DocuSign was. Nobody explained it to her. She had a sister in Dayton who couldn't take her in. She had a friend from church who had a spare room, but a husband who didn't want complications. She had nothing that felt like a direction, except one thing: a hand-drawn map on the back of a property tax receipt folded into her Bible, which she had carried for 23 years without once unfolding it. Her father, Earl Macklin, had built a cabin on 11 acres outside Harlan Springs, Virginia, in 1948. He'd built it himself: hand-hewn beams, a stone chimney, 2 small bedrooms under a low-pitched roof. He had died in 1991. The cabin had been in the family trust ever since, sitting on County Road 4 at the end of a gravel lane, untouched, uninhabited, tax-assessed at $18,400 and completely forgotten by everyone except Ruth. She had not been back in 31 years. But when she finally pried open the low wooden panel beneath the stone chimney hearth, she found something her father had spent decades quietly setting aside. Something a man named Douglas Vane had spent just as long making sure she would never find. The institutional scene happened on a Tuesday. Ruth had arrived at the offices of Mercer and Hollis on Commerce Street at 9 in the morning, wearing her good gray coat and a pair of low heels that pinched her left foot. She had driven herself. Gerald had offered to come, then canceled the night before, something about a work commitment in Charlotte. Patrice had not offered. The office had a waiting area with padded chairs and a glass-top table with no magazines on it. A woman at the front desk told Ruth that Mr. Hollis would be with her shortly. She waited 22 minutes. When Clifton Hollis finally appeared, a narrow man in his mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead, a habit of pressing the tip of his pen against his lower lip. He led her to a conference room with a window that looked out onto a parking structure. He set a manila folder on the table and folded his hands on top of it. He had the careful stillness of a man delivering a message he didn't write. "Mrs. Macklin," he said, "the sale completed Thursday the 14th. The transfer of title is recorded. As primary trustee, Gerald Macklin was authorized under the terms of your late husband's estate to execute the transaction." Ruth said, "Thomas put me on that trust." "You were listed as a beneficiary," Hollis said, "not as a co-trustee. The distinction is—" He paused, pressed the pen to his lip. "It's significant." She had known Thomas for 44 years. She had cooked 30,000 meals in that kitchen. She had stripped and refinished the hardwood floors herself, on her hands and knees, with a rented orbital sander from Ace Hardware in the spring of 1997. She had painted every room at least twice. She did not say any of that. "How much did they get for it?" she asked. The agreed sale price was $212,000. She nodded once. She pressed the flat of her hand against the edge of the table as though checking whether it was level. "And my share of that?" Hollis opened the folder. He slid a single page across to her. At the bottom was a number, $14,000, representing her 1/3 beneficiary distribution after fees, Gerald's trustee compensation, and Patrice's equal share. He explained that she would receive a check within 30 business days. Ruth looked at the number for a long time. Then she folded the page in thirds and put it in her coat pocket. "Is that everything?" she said. "Yes, ma'am." She stood up. She shook his hand because that was how she had been raised. She walked back through the waiting area and out through the glass door and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the October wind. A plastic grocery bag skated across the parking lot. She watched it go, back at the house, her house, or what had been her house, or what she could still walk around in for 72 more hours. She packed what she could fit into the canvas tote and 3 cardboard boxes from the liquor store down the road. Thomas's flannel shirt, folded. Her recipe box, the wooden one with the hand-painted roosters on the lid that her mother had given her in 1974. A framed photograph of Earl Macklin standing outside a half-built structure, squinting into the sun, holding a framing hammer, a set of tea towels, her Bible, the winter coat that wasn't as good as the gray one, her address book. She left the gray coat on the hook by the door. She didn't know why. It felt right to leave something. She loaded the boxes into the back of her 2004 Buick LeSabre, which had 141,000 miles on it and a small crack in the passenger side mirror. She got in. She sat for a minute. Then she opened the Bible on the seat beside her and found the tax receipt folded inside the back cover. She unfolded it. Earl's handwriting was in pencil, faded to a ghost, but readable. A small hand-drawn rectangle labeled cabin, a line labeled County Road 4, a note that said, "Left at the Big Oak, then follow the lane." She had driven past Harlan Springs twice in her life. She knew it was off Route 11, south of Stone Ridge. She knew it took about 4 hours from where she was sitting. She put the Buick in reverse. She drove south on 81 for 2 hours and then turned onto Route 11 where the highway thinned and the mountains edged in from both sides. The leaves were gone, late October, and the hillsides were gray and brown and rust-colored like old iron. The road was 2 lanes. She passed a gas station with a hand-lettered sign for boiled peanuts. She passed a volunteer fire station with a single bay door, closed. She passed a Dollar General and a grain elevator and a white clapboard church with a marquee sign out front that said, "Come as you are." At Stone Ridge, she turned south again onto Route 11's secondary spur, then picked up County Road 4, where a green reflective marker sat crooked in the gravel shoulder. The paved road gave way to packed gravel, then to a narrower track that was more dirt than gravel, flanked by cedar and black locust trees that leaned in from both sides until the lane felt like a tunnel. She found the Big Oak. It was enormous, wider than she'd imagined from her father's note, split at the trunk about 15 feet up into 2 massive limbs that spread over the lane like a doorframe. She turned left. The lane ran another quarter mile. The Buick's undercarriage scraped over a frost-heaved section where tree roots had buckled the earth. Ruth drove slowly, one hand on the wheel. Then the trees opened, and she saw it. The cabin stood in a clearing of about half an acre. Low and square, built from hand-hewn chestnut logs with saddle-notch corners, a stone chimney rising from the south end. The tin roof had gone from silver to rust brown over the decades, but it was intact. The porch ran the full width of the front, 2 steps up, a plank floor, a railing made from peeled locust posts. It looked from a distance like a place that had been sleeping. She parked and sat in the car for a moment with the engine running, just looking. A crow called somewhere in the tree line. The wind moved through the cedars with a low, papery sound. She turned the engine off and got out. The cabin was small, maybe 600 square feet, she estimated. The exterior logs were dark with age and weather, and in several places the chinking between them had crumbled, leaving thin gaps. The porch boards were soft underfoot, 2 of them distinctly spongy near the right corner, and she stepped carefully. She tried the front door. The lock was a 1940s-era mortise type, and she didn't have a key. But the door itself, when she pushed against the lock side, shifted slightly. She looked at the hinges. 3 solid strap hinges, black iron, oiled, not rusted, not seized. Recently oiled, she thought. The metal was dark and clean and left a faint smear on her fingertip when she touched the barrel. Someone had been here. She stood with that thought for a moment. Then she walked around the perimeter of the cabin, On the east side, the foundation was cut stone, the mortar old but solid. On the north side, a single 4-pane window looked into what would be the bedroom. The glass was intact, only slightly clouded with oxidation. On the west side, she found a small outbuilding, an old woodshed, its door hanging open, a cord and a half of split wood stacked inside under a piece of corrugated metal roofing. The wood was recent, 6 months old maybe, dry and tight stacked, the ends of the splits showing pale, clean grain, not the gray weathering of old wood. She went back to the front door. She took out a bobby pin from the pocket of her coat. She had carried 2 bobby pins habitually for 50 years, and worked at the mortise lock for 3 minutes. It was not a complicated mechanism. It opened. Inside, the cabin was dim and cold. She found the light switch out of instinct, but of course there was no power. The light through the windows was enough. The main room held a wood stove in the near corner, black cast iron, a Franklin style with the ornamental trim on the doors. A small table with 2 ladder-back chairs. A low shelf along the east wall, empty except for a zinc bucket and a kerosene lantern with oil still in the base. She found a box of matches on the shelf above the stove. She lit the lantern. The back half of the cabin divided into 2 small rooms. The left was the bedroom, a low iron frame bed with a bare mattress ticking, a dresser with a mirror gone silvery with age. The right was barely more than a closet, a second narrow bed, a small window, a wooden pegboard on the wall for hanging things. This would have been her father's room when he was building. He had told her once that he slept there for 2 winters while he finished the main structure. She went back to the main room. From her canvas tote, she took out a jar of peanut butter, a sleeve of crackers, and a thermos she'd filled at a gas station in Stone Ridge. The thermos coffee was barely warm. She sat at the table with the crackers and the peanut butter and ate slowly, watching the lantern light move on the log walls. The walls were the color of old honey. The wood had darkened beautifully over 75 years. She ran her fingers along one log near the table and could feel the axe marks, the slight irregularity of hand hewing, the way no 2 surfaces were exactly the same. Her father had touched every inch of this. She stayed with that thought. Then she noticed the hearth. The stone chimney was built from local field stone, flat slabs of shale and sandstone in rough courses, mortared with what looked like a lime and clay mix. The fireplace opening was about 30 inches wide and 2 feet tall, fitted with a cast iron damper handle on the right side. But it was the base of the chimney that caught her attention, specifically the section of the chimney where it met the floor on the left side. There was a low wooden panel there. It was about 18 inches wide and 14 inches tall, set flush into the stonework at floor level. It appeared at first glance to be a simple decorative element. A small built-in door for ash storage, perhaps, or access to the damper mechanism. The kind of detail an old cabin might have. She had seen similar things, but the wood was different from everything else in the cabin. Everything else was dark, aged, dried out. This panel was the same surface color, but when she crouched down and looked at the edge where it met the stone, the wood was ever so slightly tighter in grain, less checked, less gray at the very edge. Not new, but newer than the rest. And the small wooden button latch that held it closed, a simple half-inch pivot of hardwood on a brass brad, had a faint shine on the turning surface from repeated handling. Ruth crouched on the stone floor in front of it for a long time. The lantern threw her shadow up the wall behind her. She put out her hand and touched the button latch. It turned easily. Smooth. She sat back on her heels. She was very tired. The drive had taken 4.5 hours. Her left foot ached where the heel had rubbed it. The cabin was cold, 45 degrees, maybe 42. She should start a fire. She should unload the car. She should do a dozen practical things. Instead, she kept looking at the panel. The lantern light caught the grain of the wood. The brass brad holding the latch had a warm gleam to it. She thought about the oiled hinges on the front door. She thought about the stacked firewood in the shed. She thought about her father's handwriting on the back of a tax receipt in a Bible she had carried for 23 years. She put her hand on the panel again. She found a pry bar in the woodshed. Not that she needed it for the latch, but she brought it in anyway, along with a hand sledge and a small flathead screwdriver from the toolbox in the Buick's trunk. She set them on the floor beside her. She crouched again. The button latch turned. The panel held for a moment, not locked, but held by a slight swelling in the wood at the top edge. She pressed the screwdriver blade into the gap at the top right corner and worked it gently. There was a low, dry creak, and then the panel pivoted outward on two small hinges she hadn't seen from the front. A space opened behind it, not deep, 14 inches, maybe 16, the width of the chimney base, but built deliberately, sided with smooth planed pine boards that were in much better condition than the rest of the cabin. The inside of the space had been painted white a long time ago, 2 coats, and at some point a piece of tar paper had been tacked over the top to keep moisture out. Inside, on a low shelf made of a single pine plank, there were 3 things. A tin box, about the size of a shoebox, painted green, with a hinged lid and a simple hasp latch. No lock. A smaller item wrapped in oilcloth tied with kitchen twine. A brass key on a small cardboard tag. The tag had writing on it in the same pencil ghost handwriting she recognized from the tax receipt. It said, "Deed box, Grange Hall, Harlan Springs. Ask for Margaret." Ruth looked at these 3 objects for a moment. The lantern was behind her and to the right, and the light came into the little space in a low, warm angle, catching the tin's painted surface and the brass key's flat glint. She reached in and took out the tin box first. It was lighter than she expected. She set it on the floor in front of her. She opened the hasp. Inside the tin there was a bundle of envelopes, held together with a rubber band that had dried and cracked. Under the envelopes, a small leather-bound journal, red, the size of a hand. Under the journal, a photograph. A young woman in a house dress, laughing, standing in front of this cabin when the logs were fresh and pale, and the tin roof still shone. Ruth knew that woman. She was Ruth's mother, Dora Macklin. She was maybe 25 in the photograph. The cabin behind her was newly built, or nearly so. Ruth picked up the photograph and held it in the lantern light. Then she set it down carefully and took the top envelope from the bundle. The rubber band crumbled when she tried to remove it. She worked it off in pieces. The top envelope had no address, no stamp. On the front, in Earl Macklin's pencil handwriting, it said, "For Ruth. When she comes back." She sat down on the stone floor. Her back was against the wall below the window. The lantern threw a warm circle. She opened the envelope. The letter inside was written on a single sheet of lined paper, folded twice. The handwriting was her father's, the same slightly leftward lean she had grown up watching move across grocery lists and birthday cards and church bulletins, but slower than she remembered. More deliberate, each letter formed with care. It said, "Ruth, I don't know when you'll find this. I don't know that you will. But I built this space for it the same summer I built the chimney, and I decided that was good enough. Some things you leave and hope they find their way. I want you to know that this cabin is yours. I know your mother left it in the family trust with all 4 of you named, and I know that felt fair to her. But this land was mine before we were married, and I kept 11 acres back from the trust in a separate deed because I always meant it for you. The deed is in the box at the Grange Hall. Margaret Foss holds the key to the filing room, and she will know what it is. I told her the last time I was well enough to drive to town. I know Gerald and Patrice would have sold this along with everything else if they'd known about it. I know that about them. I am sorry that I know that about them. I raised them, and I don't say it with bitterness, only with a father's clear eyes at the end of his life. There are things in the other compartment, behind the east bedroom wall in the workshop space, that I want you to have and that no one else knows about. Don't let anyone rush you through this place. Take your time with it. It took me a long time to put it all together. The cabin is cold in October. There is wood in the shed. I hope the stove still draws well. Your father, Earl P.S. The hinges on the front door will need oil every spring or they'll seize by August. I always use 3-in-1. Ruth read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully along its original creases and put it back in the envelope. She pressed the envelope flat against the front of her coat, her hand over it, and held it there. Outside, the wind moved through the cedar trees. The lantern threw its warm, imperfect light. She sat on the stone floor for a long time and did not move. The fire had burned down to coals by the time Ruth woke. She had fallen asleep on the floor with her coat pulled over her like a blanket and the envelope still tucked inside her shirt against her sternum. The lantern had guttered out sometime in the night. The cabin was full of a gray, early light that came in flat through the east bedroom window and lay in a pale rectangle on the planked floor. Her left hip ached from the stone. Her mouth tasted like stale peanut butter and cold coffee. She lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling. The chestnut beams above her were massive, 8 inches by 10, she guessed, hand-hewn, the axe mark still visible in the wood. Her father had cut those from trees that stood on this same land. He had told her that once, a long time ago, in a tone that wasn't pride so much as simple accounting. She sat up. She pressed the envelope through the fabric of her shirt to make sure it was still there. It was. She rebuilt the fire in the Franklin stove with wood from the shed, splits of seasoned red oak, tight-grained and clean, the bark still intact. She crumpled 1 page from her address book that she no longer needed, 2 names crossed out with heavy lines, and used it for kindling. The stove drew well. Within 10 minutes, the firebox was roaring, and she could feel the radiant heat reaching her hands. She ate the last of the crackers standing at the wood stove, drank cold water from the tap. The water ran clear after 30 seconds, so the line was intact. Gravity-fed, probably from a spring tank above the property. She dressed in the second coat, the heavier one, and picked up the brass key and its cardboard tag from the tin box. Deed box, Grange Hall, Harlan Springs. Ask for Margaret. She put the key in her coat pocket and went out. Harlan Springs was 4 miles from the cabin lane by way of County Road 4 to Route 11, then a left and another mile south. The town itself was arranged around a single intersection, a hardware store on the northwest corner, a diner on the southeast, a post office the size of a 2-car garage, and a building that had been a farm co-op and was now split between a used furniture store and something that called itself Harland Insurance and Notary, the sign painted directly onto the brick. The Grange Hall was a block off the main intersection, on a side street called Mill Lane. It was a white clapboard building with green shutters, a covered porch, and a hand-lettered sign by the door that listed meeting days. A smaller sign below it said, in neat block letters, Hall Manager, M. Foss, knock and enter. Ruth knocked and entered. The main room was set up for some kind of community meeting. Folding chairs in rough rows, a podium at the front, 2 long tables pushed against the side wall. At the far end of the room, behind a Dutch door with the top half open, was a small office. A woman sat at a metal desk with a cup of coffee at her elbow and a pair of reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, going through a folder of papers. She looked up when Ruth came in. She was somewhere in her late 60s, stocky, solid through the shoulders, gray hair cut short and practical, the kind of cut a woman chooses when she has stopped making decisions about her hair and found freedom in it. She wore a green fleece vest over a flannel shirt. Her hands, resting on the desk, were the hands of a woman who worked with them, thick-knuckled, capable. She looked at Ruth for a long moment, not unfriendly, measuring. "You'd be Earl's daughter," she said, not a question. "Yes," Ruth said. Margaret Foss set down the folder. She took off the reading glasses from her forehead and set those down too. She said nothing for a moment, and in that silence, Ruth felt the woman taking stock of her. The canvas tote with the broken strap, the second-best coat, the tiredness in her posture. "Coffee's fresh," Margaret said. "Sit down." Ruth sat in the straight-back chair beside the Dutch door. Margaret poured a second cup from a drip coffee maker on the filing cabinet and handed it through the half door without asking how Ruth took it. Ruth took it plain. She wrapped both hands around it. "He told me you might come," Margaret said, settling back behind her desk. "He said it could be 5 years, it could be 30. He said when you showed up, I'd know it was you." "I found his letter last night," Ruth said. "He mentioned a deed box." Margaret nodded. She stood, pulled open the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, and produced a steel document box. Gray, about the size of a hardcover book, with a key lock on the front hasp. She set it on the desk. "Yours to open. I've been holding it since 1989. Earl brought it in himself that November, 2 years before he passed." Ruth took the brass key from her pocket. It fit the lock without resistance. The hasp swung up. Inside the box were 4 documents, folded and paper-clipped. On top was a handwritten index on an index card. Deed, 11 acres, parcel 14B. Survey plat, affidavit of separate property, letter to the county clerk. Ruth lifted out the deed. It was typed on legal-size paper, notarized in November 1989, and named Ruth Ann Macklin, her maiden name, as sole grantee of 11 acres on County Road 4, Harland Springs, Virginia, legally described by metes and bounds. The grantor was Earl D. Macklin. The notary stamp was Harland County. The deed had been recorded, the stamp said, in Deed Book 41, page 214. Ruth read the grantee line twice, her maiden name. He had put it in her maiden name specifically. "He said you'd understand why he used that name," Margaret said quietly. Ruth nodded. She pressed her thumb over the notary seal. "He also said," Margaret added, "that a man named Douglas Vane had been making inquiries about that parcel since at least 1987. Earl said Vane had been after the timber rights, and later the land itself, and that he would keep making inquiries after Earl was gone." She paused. "Has he been in touch?" Ruth looked up. "Not yet," she said. Margaret's expression didn't change. "He will be," she said. "He always does." Ruth finished her coffee. She returned the documents to the steel box and locked it and put the key in her pocket. She put her hand on the edge of the Dutch door. She said, "Thank you for holding it all this time." Margaret Fossa picked up her reading glasses and folder. "Earl Macklin was a good man," she said. "It wasn't a burden." Ruth nodded once and turned to go. "Mrs. Macklin," Margaret said. Ruth stopped. "Hatcher's Hardware, across on the main street. The man who runs it. His name is Coy Hatcher. He knew your father. He might have some things that could be useful to you." She paused, deliberate. "I'd stop in today." Coy Hatcher's hardware store was the kind of place that had not changed its layout in 40 years and was better for it. The smell hit Ruth at the door. Linseed oil and sawdust and a faint tang of WD-40 and machine grease, layered and permanent, soaked into the wooden floor and the pressed tin ceiling above it. The aisles were narrow, the shelves deep, and every surface held something. Hose clamps in segmented bins, coils of Romex wire stacked flat, a pegboard of pry bars and cat's paws, drawers of loose lag screws and anchor bolts labeled in a handwritten system that had its own logic. Behind the main counter on a stool sat a man who was at least 75 and possibly older. He was lean in the way old men who worked outdoors get lean, no extra, all structure. He had a face like something weathered down to its essential shape. High cheekbones, deep-set eyes that were a pale and specific gray. His hands, flat on the counter, were enormous relative to the rest of him, wide-palmed and scarred across the knuckles. He was reading a parts catalog. He looked up when Ruth came in. He did not speak immediately. He looked at her for a long moment with those pale gray eyes, the same measuring and weighing that Margaret Foss had done, but slower, more patient. Then he said, "You've got Earl's eyes," Ruth said. "I'm told. Get you anything?" "Margaret Fossey sent me. She said you might have something useful." Coy Hatcher set the catalog down. He reached under the counter and brought up a small cardboard box, the kind a pair of work boots might come in. He set it on the counter between them. He did not open it. "Earl brought that in about 6 months before he passed," he said. "Said his daughter Ruth would come for it. Said she'd have a brass key. Said to make sure she actually had the key before I gave it to her." Ruth took the key from her pocket and set it on the counter beside the box. Coy looked at it. He nodded once. He pushed the box toward her. Inside, on top of a folded piece of brown paper, was a 3-toured 8-inch socket wrench, the rubber grip worn smooth on the top quarter from decades of use. Below that, a folded piece of paper. Below that, a hand-drawn diagram of the cabin interior, floor plan, walls labeled, and in the east bedroom, a notation. Behind east wall, measure 36 inches from corner, panel marked with an X scratch on the baseboard. Ruth looked at the diagram. "He told me there was more," she said. "He told me the same," Coy said. "He said what was behind that wall was what he'd been putting together for 30 years. He paused. He was proud of it. I'll tell you that." Ruth folded the diagram carefully and put it in her coat pocket. "Is there anything else I should know?" she asked. Coy thought about that for a moment. "Douglas Vane's been buying up parcels around Harlan Springs for the past 4 years. He's got 2,200 acres now, up and down the ridge. He wants the timber and the creek frontage." A pause. "Your father's 11 acres has the best spring-fed creek in the county. Earl used to say it was the only thing on the property that hadn't been given to him, that the creek was just there, and the land listened to it." Ruth said, "I see." "Vane won't let go easy," Coy said. He reached back under the counter and produced something else, a folded piece of paper, a phone number handwritten on it. "That's the county assessor's extension and the name of a land attorney in Stone Ridge. Earl paid a retainer for you in 1990. There may still be money on it. The firm's changed hands, but the agreement transfers. The attorney's name is now a woman named Clara Birch. She'll know the file." Ruth looked at the phone number. She put it in her pocket with the diagram. Coy Hatcher picked up his parts catalog again. He said without looking up, "There's a phone on the wall by the door. You can use it." She did. Clara Birch's office confirmed the retainer. $1,400 still on account. Earl Macklin's file. Active status transferable to primary heir. They made an appointment for Thursday. Ruth set the handset back on its cradle. She stood there for a moment in the smell of linseed oil and machine grease with the brass key in her pocket and the diagram folded against her palm. She went back to the counter. She set $2 beside the register. Coy looked at the bills without picking them up. "What's that for?" "The coffee I didn't drink," Ruth said. "And the phone." He looked at her for a moment. Then he put one of the dollars back on the counter. "Phone's free," he said. "Coffee's $1." Ruth took the dollar back. She went out into the gray October morning and got into the Buick and drove back down Route 11 toward County Road 4 and the cabin lane. She found the east bedroom in the afternoon light. She stood in the small room with the hand-drawn diagram and measured from the northeast corner. A steel tape she'd found in a kitchen drawer. The case cracked, the blade still sound. 36 inches from the corner brought her to a section of wall between the window and the dresser. The baseboard there was a simple piece of 1x4 pine, painted white once. The paint yellowed and checked. She crouched and ran her finger along it until she felt the mark. A shallow X scratched into the paint and wood with something sharp. A nail or an awl tip, no bigger than an inch across. She moved the dresser. It was heavy, solid oak, dovetail-jointed drawers, the kind of piece that weighed what it should weigh. She got it out 6 inches from the wall by rocking it, being careful of the mirror. Then she could see the full panel. It looked like wall planking, vertical pine boards, 5 of them, running floor to ceiling, each about 8 inches wide, face nailed to the studs behind. The same yellowed paint as the baseboard, the same apparent age as everything else, but the nails on the boards above the X mark were different from the boards on either side of the section. The heads were slightly newer, slightly less oxidized, and they were set in a regular pattern, 4 per board, rather than the irregular hand nailing on the surrounding boards. She took the pry bar from beside the door where she'd left it. She set the blade at the edge of the center board, just above the baseboard. She leaned on the handle. The board cracked away from the stud with a dry, splintering sound, and the squeal of a nail pulling free. The smell that came out was different from the rest of the cabin. Drier, more enclosed, with a faint trace of cedar and something metallic, like old coins. She pulled the board aside, and the next one, and the one after that. Behind the planks was a space roughly 4 feet wide and 6 feet deep, built between 2 sets of studs with the back wall sheathed in tight-fitted tongue-and-groove pine boards that showed not a single gap. The ceiling of the space was a piece of 1 by 12, smooth-planed. The floor was the same hardwood as the bedroom, continuous. The space was full. Ruth stood with the pry bar at her side and looked. Along the right wall, 3 pieces of furniture stacked and wrapped in moving blankets tied with twine. A small rocking chair, unwrapped partially at the top. She could see the curved back, the steam-bent spindles, the hand-shaped seat, the grain of cherry wood in the low light. Beside it, what appeared to be a blanket chest, its lid fitted with a small brass hasp. And leaning against those, a tall case clock frame, the works removed and wrapped separately in a piece of cloth tied at the top. Along the left wall, a wooden cabinet, deep and narrow, its shelves visible through a chicken wire-fronted door. The shelves held mason jars, dozens of them, and in the jars what appeared to be paper. Folded paper, envelopes, and some jars held paper-clipped bundles of what she recognized after a moment as United States savings bonds. On the floor between the furniture and the cabinet, a wooden milk crate with handles, and inside it a stack of items she could not immediately identify from where she stood. She stepped into the space. Her foot found solid floor. She bent and looked at the blanket chest. On the lid, in black paint marker that had dried to a dull sheen, were 2 words, "For Ruth." She put her hand on the lid and held it there. She looked at the rocking chair. Tied to one of the spindles with kitchen twine was a small tag, the kind from a hardware store, a red border. On the front, in pencil, Ruth's chair, Cherry, built 1964. She had been 12 in 1964. She crouched in front of the cabinet and looked through the chicken wire. The mason jars were labeled in the same pencil hand. She could read some of the labels. Ruth, 21st birthday. Ruth, wedding. Ruth, first house. Ruth, 50th. 50 jars, maybe more. She couldn't count from where she was. She opened the cabinet. She took out the jar labeled Ruth, 21st birthday, and held it up to the light from the bedroom window. Inside was a folded envelope, and behind it, clipped with a paper clip, a stack of United States savings bonds in denominations of $50 and $100, and on the face of the first bond, the date, April 1973, the purchase date. Her 21st birthday was April 14, 1973. She opened the jar and took out the bonds. She counted them. 12 bonds. The denominations varied. 50, 50, 100, 150, 100. She stopped counting the math and simply fanned through them. She put them carefully back in the jar. She counted the jars on the first shelf. 14. She looked at the other shelves. 3 more shelves, each holding between 10 and 15 jars. She sat down on the floor of the hidden room. The blanket chest said for Ruth. The rocking chair had been built in 1964. There were 50 or more jars, each labeled for a year or occasion of her life, each holding an envelope and savings bonds built up over decades, one purchase at a time. Earl Macklin had retired from the post office in 1971 on a pension of $440 a month. He had done this on $440 a month. And she understood, sitting there, that this was not the only thing he had spent that pension on. He had also oiled the hinges. He had also stacked the firewood. He had also paid a retainer to a land attorney in Stonebridge. He had been taking care of her for decades without her knowing it. She sat in the hidden room with her back against the cabinet and her hands in her lap. The afternoon light moved slowly through the bedroom window and across the floor until it reached the edge of the hidden space. After a while, she reached into the milk crate. The items inside: a hammer, a 16-ounce Estwing with the blue rubber grip, still clean, a handsaw wrapped in cloth, a set of chisels in a leather roll, and at the bottom, under the tools, a manila envelope, unsealed. She took out the manila envelope. On the front, again in Earl's handwriting, it said, "Read this one last. It is for you." She turned the envelope over in her hands. She stood up. She carried it to the main room and put 2 pieces of oak in the Franklin stove and waited until the fire was going and the room was warmer. She sat at the table with the lantern in front of her, even though it was still afternoon, and she did not need it. Then she opened the envelope. Inside was 4 pages, handwritten front and back on the same lined paper as the first letter. At the top of the first page, November 12, 1990. And below the date, Ruth. This is everything I want you to know. She smoothed the pages flat on the table and read. Ruth, this is the letter I've been working up to writing for about 20 years. I've started it at least a dozen times and thrown every version out. This one I'll keep because I'm running out of time and I've decided that something imperfect and honest is worth more than nothing perfect. I'll start with the cabin. I built it in 1947 and 1948 on land I bought from Howard Grabb for $200 in 1946, 6 months before I married your mother. It was 40 acres then. I sold 29 of those acres over the years when things were lean. Once in 1954 when you were 2 and the heating bill had gotten out from under us. Once in 1961 to pay for your mother's surgery. Once in 1968 to help get Gerald started on his house. What I have left is 11 acres and the cabin. I want you to have them because you were the one who came here as a child and understood what it was. Gerald and Patrice, I love them and I know their natures, and they would sell it inside a year. You came here when you were 6 and you found a box turtle in the creek and spent the whole afternoon talking to it. I don't know if you remember that. I have remembered it for 60 years. Now, the furniture and the savings bonds. I started buying bonds in 1960. Your grandfather Ruford left me $80 when he died, and I put it into your first bond that October, the month you turned 8. I kept doing it from the pension after I retired. I have bought bonds for every birthday and every occasion I knew about, and for some I had to invent. I bought one for the day you took your driving test and one for the day you told me over the phone that you were happy, which was a February in 1979 that I don't think you'd remember as particularly significant. But it mattered to me. I know it's not a great fortune. The bonds total somewhere around $11,000 at current values as I write this, and they will keep earning. Spend them on whatever needs spending on. The furniture took me longer. I have been building furniture since 1946 in a borrowed shop, and later in the space behind the east wall that I put in during the winter of 1962. I built your rocking chair the year you turned 12 because you used to sit on the porch at this cabin in the little rocker your grandmother had, and I always meant for you to have something like it. I built the blanket chest in 1971. The tall case clock I started in 1978, and the works are in a separate box at the bottom of the milk crate. They need to be cleaned and reassembled by someone who knows movements. And there is a man named Coy Hatcher in town who does, or who can tell you who does. I built these things because I needed to build something for you, and I wasn't able to say what I needed to say. Your mother understood that about me. You might too. Now I need to tell you about Thomas. I know you love Thomas, and I know he was a good husband to you in most of the ways that count, but in 1983, he came to me and told me he intended to put this cabin in the family trust, along with his own property when he wrote his estate plan, and he wanted to know how I had it titled. I told him the truth, that I had deeded it to you separately in your maiden name in 1989. He did not know that at the time, in 1983, but he sensed something of it, and he was not pleased. He came back to me in 1984 and told me he felt the property should be consolidated for simplicity. I said no. He said that he thought you would agree with him. I said that I thought he was wrong, but that was something between the two of you. I want you to know that I believe Thomas made those estate decisions from genuine conviction and not from meanness. He was not a mean man. He believed in order and consolidation and what he called being sensible about things. I simply did not agree with him about what was sensible in this case, and I want you to know that I never told you about any of this while he was alive because it was not my marriage and not my place. And I would have told you after he was gone if I had lived long enough. Ruth, I want to say one more thing. Your mother and I had 4 children, and you were the second, and you were the one who asked to come to the cabin. You were the one who drew pictures of the creek. You were the one who, when you were 16, asked me how dovetail joints worked and then stayed in the shop for 2 hours while I showed you. You were the one who called me every Sunday for 20 years. Without missing a single Sunday, unless one of us was in the hospital. And even then, usually. I know your life has had hard places. I know about the years in the middle that were harder than you told me. I know more than you might think, because you are my daughter, and some things don't need to be spoken to be known. I have been proud of you every single year of your life. I loved you every single day. Your father, Earl D. Macklin, November 12, 1990 P.S. The cherry rocker will need a light sanding and a coat of tung oil. Use 220 grit paper and go with the grain. Don't rush it. Ruth read the letter all the way through, folded it, and put it back in the envelope. Then she put the envelope on the table in front of her and pressed both her palms flat on either side of it, as though centering something. The light through the cabin windows had gone amber, and then pink. The Franklin stove ticked with heat. Outside, a pair of crows moved through the bare trees without calling. She looked at the letter on the table for a long time. She did not cry. She pressed the back of her right hand against her mouth for a moment and then let it fall. She sat straight in the ladder-back chair. After a while, she banked the stove and went to the bedroom and lay down on the bare mattress, ticking with the letter in the envelope on the floor beside her, within reach. The room went dark. The cabin settled into its nighttime sounds. The tick of the cooling stove, the wind at the eaves, something small moving in the woodshed. She slept with her hand resting on the edge of the mattress, close to the floor, close to the envelope. In the morning, she would have to figure out what to do next. She knew that. There was the deed to register properly, the attorney appointment on Thursday, Coy Hatcher, and the clockworks. There was firewood enough, and food for 2 more days if she was careful, and $47 still in her coat pocket minus the $1 for the phone. But that was morning. Tonight she lay in the cabin her father had built in 1948 and listened to the wind, and the cabin held her the way it had been built to hold, tight at the corners, square to the foundation. Everything plumb. If you've made it this far into Ruth's story, hit subscribe. because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. The car came up the lane on a Friday morning. Ruth heard it before she saw it. A smooth, expensive engine, the kind that runs so quietly you notice the absence of noise more than the sound itself. She was on the porch with a cup of instant coffee from a packet she'd found in the Buick's glove box, watching a red-tailed hawk work the far field, when the black Lincoln Navigator turned off County Road 4 and came up the gravel lane through the trees. It parked behind the Buick. The driver's door opened and a man got out. He was perhaps 55, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark wool overcoat and leather gloves that he removed one finger at a time as he walked toward the porch. His hair was gray at the temples and barbered close. He had the face of a man who had won most of the negotiations he had been part of, not through force but through patience and the steady application of comfort. He moved with a kind of deliberate ease, like a man who was in no hurry because no one had ever made him hurry. He stopped at the base of the porch steps and looked up at Ruth. "Mrs. Macklin," he said. His voice was pleasant, measured. "Douglas Vane. I apologize for arriving without calling ahead. I couldn't find a number for you." Ruth held her coffee cup with both hands. "There's no phone here," she said. "Of course." He looked at the cabin, the clearing, the tree line. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he has been thinking about for a long time. "It's a beautiful piece of land. I've always thought so." Ruth said nothing. He reached into his coat and produced a business card, holding it out at arm's length. She came down the steps and took it. Douglas Vane, Vane Land Holdings, LLC, a Stone Ridge address, a phone number. She put it in her coat pocket. "I'll be direct," he said. "I have a significant interest in properties along County Road 4 and the surrounding ridge. Your father's 11 acres it's a gap in an otherwise contiguous parcel. The creek frontage alone is quite valuable. I would like to make you an offer today, if you're willing to listen." Ruth waited. $94,000, he said. "Clean title transfer, no contingencies, 30-day close, cash." He said it the way you say a number you expect to be impressive to the person you're saying it to, not unkind, simply confident. Ruth looked at the card in her pocket, though she couldn't see it. She thought about the 50 jars in the hidden room, and the letter on the floor beside her bed, and the cherry rocking chair wrapped in a moving blanket. "No," she said. Vane nodded, as if this had been anticipated. "I understand you haven't had much time to evaluate your situation here. The property needs substantial work. The chinking on the north face alone, and the roof will need attention before spring." He paused. "I'm not trying to take advantage. I'm trying to offer you a fair exit." "I'm not looking for an exit," Ruth said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he smiled, briefly, and looked again at the tree line. "You should know," he said in the same pleasant voice, "that there are some conversations happening at the county level about zoning on the ridge parcels, agricultural assessment, development corridors. These things have a way of affecting property values and use restrictions." Another pause. "I'd hate for you to be caught without options when those conversations conclude." He put his gloves back on, one finger at a time. He looked up at the cabin one more time. "I'll leave the offer open," he said. "You have my card." He walked back to the Navigator. The door closed with a soft, expensive sound. The engine started without a sound. He backed down the lane and turned onto County Road 4, and was gone. Ruth stood at the bottom of the porch steps for a long time. The hawk was gone from the far field. The wind moved through the cedars. The cabin behind her was quiet. She went inside and sat at the table. She put Douglas Vane's business card on the tabletop and looked at it. $94,000. She thought about the Buick with 141,000 miles and $47 in peanut butter crackers. She thought about zoning conversations. She was 71 years old, and she had arrived at this cabin with a broken tote bag and 3 boxes from the liquor store. She had nowhere else to go. That was the simple fact of it. She picked up Vane's card. She held it between 2 fingers for a moment. Then she set it back on the table, in the center, and went to add wood to the stove. She had an attorney appointment on Thursday. She had a deed in a brass-keyed box. She had a retainer that Earl Macklin had paid 30 years ago for exactly this. She sat back down at the table and looked at the card, and then looked away from it and looked at the log wall instead, at the color of the wood, at the places where the axe marks still showed in the surface where her father had shaped each beam. She sat with the new fear, the way you sit with a draft in an old house. You feel it, you locate it, and then you decide what needs caulking. Ruth woke Saturday morning to frost on the inside of the windows. She built the fire first, then dressed in layers, the flannel shirt that had been Thomas's, the heavy coat, a pair of wool socks she'd found in the bottom of one of the cardboard boxes. The Franklin stove drew well, and within 20 minutes the cabin had warmed enough that she could see her breath dissipate instead of hang. She ate the last of the peanut butter straight from the jar with a spoon and drank instant coffee made with water heated on the stovetop in the zinc bucket. She needed supplies. She needed food that wasn't crackers. She needed to think. She drove into Harlan Springs just after 9. The diner on the southeast corner of the main intersection had a sign in the window that said "Open" and a menu board outside that listed breakfast plates for $5 and $6. Ruth parked the Buick in front and went in. The interior was narrow and warm, with a counter running the length of the room and 6 booths along the opposite wall. The smell was coffee and bacon grease and something sweet baking in the back. A woman in her mid-60s stood behind the counter pouring coffee into a row of white ceramic mugs. She had steel gray hair pulled back in a clip, a white apron over a denim shirt, and the kind of posture that comes from 40 years on your feet. She looked up when Ruth came in. "Sit anywhere," she said. Ruth took the last booth by the window. The woman came over with a pot of coffee and a laminated menu and set both on the table without asking if Ruth wanted either. "Give you a minute," she said, and walked back to the counter. Ruth looked at the menu. 2 eggs, any style, toast and hash browns for $5. She had $46 left after the phone and the coffee at the hardware store. She ordered the eggs. The woman, her name tag said Joanne, brought the plate 8 minutes later. Eggs over easy, the hash browns crisp at the edges, 2 slices of white toast with butter in a small ramekin. She set it down and refilled Ruth's coffee without being asked. "You're staying out at Earl's place," Joanne said. Not a question. Ruth looked up. "Yes," Joanne nodded once. "Thought so. Coy mentioned it." She paused, wiped her hands on her apron. "Your father used to come in here every Saturday morning for about 20 years. Same booth you're in, same order. 2 eggs, hash browns, wheat toast. He'd read the paper and drink 3 cups of coffee and leave a $2 tip on a $5 check." Ruth set her fork down. "He was a good man," Joanne said. "Quiet but good." She looked at Ruth for a moment longer. "You need anything while you're here, you ask. All right?" Ruth nodded. Joanne went back to the counter. Ruth ate slowly. The eggs were cooked right. The white set, the yolk still soft. The hash browns had been seasoned with something, paprika maybe, and a little onion. It was the first hot meal she'd had in 6 days. When she finished, Joanne came back with the coffee pot. "What do I owe you?" Ruth asked. $5. Ruth put 6 on the table. Joanne looked at the bills, then at Ruth. "You don't need to do that. My father did," Ruth said. Joanne picked up the bills and put them in her apron pocket. She refilled Ruth's cup one more time and walked away without another word. Ruth sat in the booth and drank the coffee and looked out the window at the intersection. A man in a Carhartt jacket went into the hardware store across the street. A woman with a small child came out of the post office. A pickup truck with a trailer full of firewood turned south onto Route 11. It was a small town. Everyone knew Earl. Everyone knew she was here. She thought about Douglas Vane and his business card and the conversations happening at the county level. She finished the coffee and stood to leave. Joanne called from behind the counter. "Ruth." Ruth stopped. Joanne came around the counter with a white paper bag, folded at the top. She handed it to Ruth. "Couple of sandwiches, ham and cheese. You've got no refrigeration out there yet, and it's supposed to drop tonight." Ruth opened her mouth to say something. "Don't," Joanne said. "Just take them." Ruth took the bag. She held it against her chest for a moment. "Thank you." Joanne waved her off and went back to the counter. Ruth walked out into the cold morning with the bag of sandwiches and got into the Buick and sat there for a minute, hands on the wheel, not moving. Then she drove back to the cabin. She found it in the afternoon. She had been thinking about the diagram Coy Hatcher had given her, the one with the floor plan and the notation about the east wall. She had opened the hidden space behind the planks and found the furniture and the jars and the letter. But the diagram showed something else. A second notation, smaller, at the bottom right corner. "Floor stone, northeast corner of main room. Lift carefully." She went to the northeast corner of the main room, near the door. The floor there was wide planked chestnut, the same as the rest of the cabin, dark with age and foot traffic. But in the very corner, tight against the wall, there was a section, about 2 feet square, where the planks had been cut and fitted back in, the seams visible only if you knew to look for them. She knelt and ran her fingers along the seams. There was a gap, narrow, just wide enough to fit the blade of a flathead screwdriver. She retrieved the screwdriver from the Buick and worked it into the gap, gently, and pried upward. The section of floor lifted as a single piece. The planks had been glued to a plywood backer, and the whole assembly was hinged on one side with 2 small brass hinges set flush into the wood. It opened like a trapdoor, smooth and balanced. Beneath it was a stone-lined cavity, about 18 inches deep and 2 feet square. The walls of the cavity were mortared fieldstone, the same construction as the chimney. At the bottom, resting on a piece of folded canvas, were 3 things. A wooden box, the size of a shoebox, unfinished pine with a sliding lid, a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. A small leather-bound ledger, brown, the edges worn soft. Ruth lifted them out one at a time and set them on the floor beside her. She closed the trapdoor carefully, then sat cross-legged on the planks with the 3 objects in front of her. She opened the wooden box first. Inside, wrapped in a piece of soft cloth, were tools. Not the heavy tools of construction, but the fine tools of finish work. A small block plane, a marking gauge, a set of mortise chisels in graduated sizes, a dovetail saw with a brass-backed blade, a spoke shave. Each tool was oiled and clean, the handles worn smooth from use. At the bottom of the box, wrapped separately, was a pair of calipers and a small wooden rule, folding, marked in 16ths. These were Earl's tools, the tools he had used to build the furniture in the hidden room. Ruth set the box aside and picked up the ledger. The pages inside were filled with Earl's handwriting, columns of dates, descriptions, and dollar amounts. She turned to the first page. The first entry was dated October 1960 and read, "Bond, $50, Ruth 8th birthday." The second entry, November 1960, bond, $25, Christmas fund. The third, December 1960, bond, $50, Ruth, general. She paged through the ledger. Every month, sometimes twice a month, an entry. The amounts varied, $25, $50, sometimes $100. Each entry labeled with Ruth's name and a date or occasion. The ledger ran from 1960 to 1990. The last entry dated October 14, 1990. Bond, $100, Ruth 60th year fund. At the bottom of the last page, in larger letters, Earl had written, Total face value as of OKT 1990, $11,240. Maturity value approx. 1800 by 2000. Ruth closed the ledger and set it on top of the wooden box. She picked up the manila envelope. The red wax seal on the flap was intact. She broke it carefully and opened the envelope. Inside were documents, legal-size papers, folded. She took them out and spread them on the floor. The first was the original deed to the 40 acres Earl had purchased in 1946, recorded in Harlan County Deed Book 12, page 88. Grantor, Howard Grab. Grantee, Earl D. Macklin. Purchase price, $200. The second was a series of smaller deeds, each recording a sale of a portion of the original parcel. 1954, 10 acres sold to a man named Everett Cole for $600. 1961, 12 acres sold to Harlan Township for $950. 1968, 7 acres sold to Gerald Macklin for $100. The third document was a survey plat, dated 1989, showing the 11-acre remainder parcel with meets and bounds clearly marked. At the top of the plat, in the surveyor's neat drafting hand, Parcel 14B, remainder of original 40-acre tract, Earl D. Macklin, owner of record. The fourth document was the deed she had already seen in the steel box at the Grange Hall, the 1989 deed conveying Parcel 14B to Ruth Ann Macklin. But the fifth document was new. It was a letter, typed on the letterhead of a law firm in Stone Ridge, Garrison and Lowell, attorneys at law. It was dated November 18, 1989, and addressed to Earl D. Macklin. Ruth read it slowly. Dear Mr. Macklin, this letter confirms our consultation of November 15, 1989, and the arrangements made thereon. Per your instruction, we have prepared and filed the deed conveying Parcel 14B, 11 acres, County Road 4, Harlan Springs, to your daughter, Ruth Ann Macklin, in her sole name. The deed has been recorded in the Harlan County Clerk's office as of November 16, 1989. You have also executed a paid retainer agreement in the amount of $1,400 to cover future legal representation for Ruth Ann Macklin in the event of any dispute, claim, or challenge related to the above-described property. This retainer is to remain active and transferable to any successor firm in the event of dissolution or sale of this practice. You have further instructed us to prepare a letter to be held in our files and delivered to Ruth Ann Macklin in the event she makes contact with this firm. That letter is enclosed separately and marked confidential. We are honored to be of service. Respectfully, Raymond Garrison. Esquire. Clipped to the letter was a smaller envelope, marked confidential, for Ruth Ann Macklin only. Ruth stared at the envelope. She opened it. Inside was a single folded page. She unfolded it and read, November 15th, 1989. Ruth, if you are reading this, it means you have come to the cabin and found your way to the things I have been setting aside. I am glad. I want to tell you why I did this the way I did. In 1983, Thomas came to me and told me he was creating a family trust that would consolidate all property, his house, his rental property in Greensboro, and this cabin. He asked me to sign papers that would transfer the cabin into that trust so it could be managed alongside everything else after he was gone. He said it made sense. He said it was simpler. He said you agreed with him. I did not sign. I told him that the cabin was mine to give and that I had already decided to give it to you separately. He was not happy. He said that kind of thinking caused family conflicts. He said Gerald and Patrice would contest it. He said you would be hurt by the division. I told him I did not believe that. I told him I believed you would understand. He came back to me twice more over the next 2 years. Each time I said no. The last time, in 1985, he told me he thought I was being stubborn and old-fashioned, and that I was setting you up for legal trouble down the line. I think he was wrong, but I also think he meant well. Thomas was a man who believed in order and systems and the cleanest way through a problem. I do not fault him for that. It was his nature. But Ruth, this land is not about order. It is about the thing I built with my own hands and the place I brought you when you were 6 years old. and you found a box turtle and named it Edward, and cried when we had to let it go at the end of the day. I am giving this to you because you are the one who loved it, not because you are the oldest or the most responsible or the one who needs it most, because you loved it. I have put the deed in your maiden name because I wanted it to be yours in a way that no marriage or trust or legal structure could touch. It is yours the way your name is yours, the way your hands are yours. I wanted it to be that clear. Thomas will not know about this deed. I have not told him. I will not tell him. When I am gone, he will assume the cabin is part of the estate to be divided. He may put it in his trust papers. That does not matter. The deed is recorded. It is yours. The law is clear. If anyone challenges this, and I believe Douglas Vane will, because he has wanted this land since 1987, and he is a patient man. You have a lawyer paid for, and a deed that is sound. You do not need to be afraid of that fight. I want to say one last thing. You have spent a lot of your life trying not to ask for things. I know that about you. I knew it when you were 10, and I know it now. You have tried to be small and quiet and not a burden. I don't know where you learned that, and I don't know if I could have taught you different. But Ruth, this is not something you are asking for. This is something I am giving you, because it is already yours. It has always been yours. When you stand on this land, I want you to know that you are standing on something that no one can take from you unless you let them. And I am asking you, I am telling you, do not let them. Live here if you want, sell it if you must, but make that choice yours, not theirs. I have loved you since the day you were born. I have been proud of you every year since. If I could give you more than 11 acres and a cabin, I would. But this is what I have, and it is yours. Your father, Earl D. Macklin Ruth read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it back in the envelope and set the envelope on top of the ledger and the wooden box and sat with her back against the log wall. The light from the window was gray and low, late afternoon tilting toward evening. The stove ticked quietly in the corner. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees with a sound like water over stones. She sat with the letter in her lap and her hands folded over it. She thought about Thomas and the trust and the papers she had signed without reading them, because Thomas had said they were standard. She thought about Gerald and the DocuSign and the house sold out from under her while she was at her Thursday morning card group. She thought about Douglas Vane in his wool coat and his leather gloves, and his polite, patient voice saying there are conversations happening at the county level. She thought about her father writing this letter in 1989, 5 years after Thomas had asked him to sign the cabin into the trust, 2 years before Earl died. He had known, he had seen it coming, and he had built a wall around this place so she would have something left when everything else was gone. She sat against the log wall until the light outside failed completely and the cabin was dark except for the glow from the stove's firebox. Then she stood, lit the kerosene lantern, and carried the letter and the ledger and the box of tools to the table. She made a fire in the stove. She ate one of the ham and cheese sandwiches Joanne had given her. She sat at the table with the letter in front of her and read it a third time by lantern light. Then she folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and placed it on the shelf above the stove next to the first letter Earl had written, the one that had been in the tin box behind the hearth panel. She sat at the table until the fire burned low. Then she went to the bedroom, lay down on the bare mattress with her coat over her like a blanket, and slept with the sound of the wind in the cedars and the old tin roof ticking in the cold. In the morning, she would call Clara Birch, the land attorney in Stone Ridge. She would go to the Thursday appointment. She would do what needed doing. But tonight, she lay in the cabin her father had built in 1948, and she let herself be held by it, by the thick walls and the mortared stone and the hand-hewn beams that had been standing for 75 years and would stand for 75 more. If you've made it this far into Ruth's story, Hit subscribe. Because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. The certified letter arrived on Tuesday. Ruth had driven into town that morning to use the payphone outside the post office. She called Clara Birch's office in Stone Ridge and confirmed the Thursday appointment. She bought a 10-pound bag of rice, a dozen eggs, a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a package of dried beans at the Dollar General. She filled the Buick's tank at the Citgo on Route 11. She had $31 left. When she came back to the cabin just after noon, there was a Harlan County Sheriff's cruiser parked in the clearing. A deputy, a young man, maybe 30, with a buzz cut and a stiff new uniform, stood on the porch holding a clipboard and a large manila envelope. He looked up when Ruth got out of the Buick. "Mrs. Ruth Macklin?" he said. "Yes." He came down the steps and handed her the clipboard. "Need you to sign for certified mail, ma'am." Ruth signed. The deputy handed her the envelope, touched the brim of his hat, got back in the cruiser and drove down the lane. Ruth stood in the clearing with the envelope in her hands. The return address was printed in the upper left corner. Vane Land Holdings, LLC, Douglas Vane, registered agent, Stone Ridge, VA. Below that, in smaller type, sent via legal counsel, Murphy and Cross, attorneys at law. She carried the envelope inside and set it on the table. She put 2 pieces of oak in the stove. She sat down and opened the envelope. Inside were 3 documents, stapled separately. The first was a letter on law firm letterhead, addressed to Ruth Ann Macklin. It was dated November 4th, 5 days ago. She read it. "Dear Mrs. Macklin, this firm represents Vane Land Holdings, LLC in matters related to property acquisition and land use planning in Harlan County, Virginia. Our client has made a good faith offer to purchase the property commonly known as Parcel 14B, County Row 4, Harlan Springs, consisting of approximately 11 acres. You have declined that offer. We write to inform you of the following. A petition has been filed with the Harlan County Zoning Board to reclassify approximately 2,400 acres along the County Road 4 corridor from agricultural residential, AR, to managed forestry and commercial corridor, FCC. This reclassification would impose new use restrictions, require updated environmental impact assessments, and mandate infrastructure upgrades for any habitable structures within the corridor. Parcel 14B falls within the proposed reclassification zone. A public hearing on this petition is scheduled for November 18, 1993 at 6 p.m. at the Harlan County Courthouse, 114 Main Street, Harlan Springs. You are entitled to appear and comment. Additionally, our client has initiated a title review of Parcel 14B and has identified several irregularities in the chain of title that may affect the validity of the current deed. A formal, quiet title action may be filed if these irregularities cannot be resolved informally. We encourage you to seek independent legal counsel. Respectfully, Andrew Murphy, Esquio, Murphy, and Cross. The second document was a copy of the zoning petition, dense with legal language and maps. Ruth could make out a highlighted section that included County Road 4 and a parcel marked 14B in red. The third document was a photocopy of an old deed, not the 1989 deed Earl had given her, but an earlier deed, dated 1946, showing the original 40-acre tract. Someone had circled a section of the legal description in red pen and written in the margin, "Conflict, survey discrepancy, title defect." Ruth set the documents on the table and looked at them. The hearing was in 9 days. She had $31, a Buick with 141,000 miles, and a retainer with a law firm that had changed hands at least once since 1990. She sat very still. Then she stood, put on her coat, and drove back into town. Coy Hatcher was at the counter when she walked into the hardware store. He looked up from the parts catalog, saw her face, and set the catalog down. "What happened?" he said. Ruth handed him the letter from Murphy and Cross. He read it slowly, his face expressionless. Then he set it on the counter and looked at her. "You have a lawyer?" "I have an appointment Thursday with Clara Birch." Good, she's sound. He folded the letter and handed it back to her. This is Vane doing what Vane does. He files petitions. He finds title defects that aren't defects. He makes noise until people fold. Your father knew he'd try it. The hearing is in 9 days. I know. Coy reached under the counter and pulled out a battered address book, the kind with alphabetical tabs on the side. He flipped to a page and wrote a name and number on a scrap of receipt paper. Martin Tiller, he's the chair of the county zoning board, retired school teacher, lives on Crow Hill Road. He knew your father. He pushed the paper across the counter. Call him. Tell him who you are. Don't ask him for anything. Just tell him you'll be at the hearing. Ruth took the paper. Will it matter? It might. Coy closed the address book. Earl spent 30 years helping people in this county without ever saying a word about it. Some of those people are still here. Some of them remember. Ruth put the paper in her coat pocket. She stood there for a moment, not sure what else to say. Coy said, "You need anything else?" "No." "Then go see Clara Birch on Thursday. Bring every piece of paper your father left you. Let her do her job." He paused. "And Ruth, don't let Vane scare you into selling. That's what this is. He's trying to scare you." Ruth nodded. She drove back to the cabin and called Martin Tiller from the payphone outside the post office. He answered on the third ring. She told him who she was. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Earl's daughter." "Yes, sir. I heard you were back." Another pause. "You planning to be at the hearing on the 18th? "Yes, sir." "Good," he said. "I'll see you there." He hung up. Ruth stood at the payphone with the receiver in her hand for a moment, then set it back on the cradle. She drove back to the cabin and sat at the table with the letter from Murphy and Cross and the deed and the survey plat and Earl's letter spread out in front of her. She went over every word. She made notes on the back of an envelope. She tried to find the conflict the lawyer had circled on the 1946 deed and couldn't see it. At some point it got dark. She lit the lantern. She ate the second ham and cheese sandwich. She sat at the table until her eyes ached, and then she went to bed. The wind picked up overnight, and the cabin creaked and settled, and Ruth lay awake listening to it and thinking about November 18th and what she was going to say when they asked her why she thought she had the right to be there. Thursday morning, she drove to Stone Ridge. Clara Birch's office was on the second floor of a 2-story brick building on Commerce Street, above a real estate agency. The door had frosted glass with gold lettering. Clara Birch, attorney at law. Ruth knocked and entered. The reception area was small. 2 chairs, a desk, a filing cabinet. A woman in her early 40s sat behind the desk, dark hair pulled back, wire-rimmed glasses, a green cardigan over a white blouse. She looked up and stood. "Mrs. Macklin?" "Yes." "Clara Birch." She shook Ruth's hand. Her grip was firm, her hands cool. "Come on back." The office behind the reception area was larger than Ruth expected. A wide oak desk, 2 client chairs, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal volumes and labeled binders. A window looked out onto Commerce Street. Clara gestured to one of the chairs and sat behind the desk. "I pulled your father's file," she said, tapping a thick accordion folder on the desk. "Retainer agreement from 1990, paid in full, transferable. The firm that held it originally, Garrison and Lowell, dissolved in 1991, and the files came to me when I bought the practice in 1992. Your father's retainer is still active. You have $1,400 in credit." Ruth nodded. "Tell me what's happened," Clara said. Ruth handed her the letter from Murphy and Cross, the zoning petition, and the photocopied deed with the circled conflict. Clara read each document carefully, making notes on a legal pad. When she finished, she set them aside and leaned back in her chair. "All right," she said. "Let's start with the title issue. Do you have the original deed your father gave you?" Ruth handed her the 1989 deed from the steel box. Clara read it, then pulled a binder from the shelf behind her and flipped through it. She found a page, compared it to the deed, and nodded. This deed is recorded. Book 41, page 214. It's valid. The so-called conflict Murphy is referring to. She tapped the photocopied 1946 deed. Is a surveying notation from 1946 that was cleared in a 1950 amended plat. It's not a defect. It's ancient history. Murphy knows that, but he's hoping you don't. Ruth felt something loosen in her chest. Now the zoning petition, Clara continued. That's real. Vane has filed it, and the hearing is scheduled for November 18th. If the petition passes, it won't invalidate your ownership, but it will restrict what you can do with the property, and it will likely lower the market value. That's the point. He's trying to devalue the land so you'll sell cheap. Can he do that? He can try. The zoning board has 5 members. 3 of them are reasonable. 2 are in Vane's pocket. It'll depend on who shows up and what gets said at the hearing. Clara tapped her pen on the legal pad. Your father left you more than a deed, Mrs. Macklin. He left you a history. And history matters in a place like Harlan County. Ruth looked at her. I'm going to make some calls, Clara said. I'm going to pull the original survey records and the 1950 amendment and get them certified. I'm going to file a formal response to the title challenge and copy the zoning board, and I'm going to be at that hearing with you on the 18th. How much will that cost? Your retainer covers it, and if we go over, we'll talk. Clara closed the folder. Mrs. Macklin, I never met your father, but his file tells me everything I need to know. He planned for this. He knew Vane would come. He paid me 30 years in advance to make sure you'd have someone in your corner when it happened. She paused. I'm in your corner. Don't let them push you out. Ruth nodded. She felt a tightness in her throat that she didn't trust herself to speak through. Clara stood. I'll see you at the courthouse on November 18th, 6 p.m. Bring the deed, bring any letters or documents your father left you, and bring yourself. That's all you need. Ruth shook her hand and left. She sat in the Buick outside the office for a long time, hands on the wheel, not moving. Then she drove back to Harlan Springs. She was unloading a bag of rice from the Buick when the second car came up the lane. It was Saturday, 2 days after the meeting with Clara Birch, 4 days before the hearing. The car was a rusted-out Dodge Neon, primer gray, with a crack across the windshield and a back bumper held on with zip ties. It parked behind the Buick and sat there idling for a moment before the engine shut off. The driver's door opened and a young woman got out. She was maybe 22, thin in the way that comes from missing meals, wearing jeans and a denim jacket too light for the weather. Her hair was dark and pulled back in a ponytail. She had a backpack slung over one shoulder, and the wary, measuring look of someone who had been turned away from a lot of places. She stood by the car and looked at Ruth. "This Earl Macklin's place?" she said. Ruth set the rice on the porch steps. It was. "He's still alive?" "No, he passed in 1991. The young woman nodded slowly. She looked at the cabin, then back at Ruth. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'll go." "Wait," Ruth said. "Why were you looking for him?" The young woman hesitated. "My grandma told me if I ever got stuck, I should come here. She said Earl Macklin was a man who helped people and didn't ask questions." She shifted the backpack on her shoulder. "I got stuck." Ruth looked at her. At the too light jacket, the backpack with a rolled sleeping bag tied to the bottom, the car that looked like it wouldn't make it another 50 miles. "What's your name?" Ruth said. Lily Trent." Ruth looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up the bag of rice and carried it to the porch. "Come inside," she said. "It's cold." Lily followed her in. Ruth set the rice on the counter and put 2 pieces of wood in the stove. She filled the kettle and set it on the stovetop to heat. She gestured to one of the chairs at the table. Sit." Lily sat, the backpack still on her lap. "When did you eat last?" Ruth asked. "Yesterday morning." Ruth made 2 peanut butter sandwiches and set one in front of Lily with a cup of instant coffee. Lily ate the sandwich in 4 bites and drank the coffee without stopping. Ruth made her another sandwich. When Lily finished, Ruth refilled her cup and sat down across from her. "Who was your grandmother?" Ruth asked. "Evelyn Trent. She lived in Colton. She passed last year." Ruth tried to place the name and couldn't. "I didn't know her." She knew Earl. She said he helped her once, a long time ago when she needed it. She said he was the kind of man who did that. Lily wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "She told me if I ever couldn't go home, I should come here." "Why can't you go home?" Lily looked at her coffee. "Because the person I need to not be around knows where home is." Ruth understood. She stood and went to the small closet off the main room. She pulled out a wool blanket, old but clean, and a pillow with a faded floral case. She brought them back and set them on the table. "There's a second bedroom," Ruth said. "It's small, but it's warm enough if the stove stays fed. You can stay there tonight." Lily looked at the blanket, then at Ruth. "I don't have money. I didn't ask for money. Why are you doing this?" Ruth thought about that. She thought about a man named Earl Macklin who had spent 30 years quietly helping people and not saying a word about it. She thought about Joanne at the diner handing her sandwiches. She thought about Coy Hatcher giving her a phone number and a folder without asking for anything in return. "Because my father would have," Ruth said, "and because I can." Lily sat very still. Then she nodded once, slow, and picked up the blanket. Ruth showed her the back bedroom, the narrow bed, the pegboard on the wall, the small window that looked out onto the tree line. Lily set her backpack on the floor and stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ruth nodded. "Get some rest." She left Lily there and went back to the main room. She sat at the table with her own cup of coffee and looked at the stove and the lantern and the letter from Murphy and Cross still sitting on the shelf. 4 days until the hearing, and a young woman asleep in the back bedroom because her grandmother had told her that Earl Macklin was the kind of man who helped people. Ruth finished her coffee and banked the stove for the night. Then she lay down in the front bedroom and listened to the wind and the sound of someone else breathing in the cabin. And for the first time in a long time, the place didn't feel empty. The morning of November 18th came cold and clear. Ruth woke before dawn and built the fire, and made coffee and sat at the table in the dim light with Earl's letter in front of her. She had read it so many times in the past 2 weeks that she had parts of it memorized. "When you stand on this land, I want you to know that you are standing on something that no one can take from you unless you let them." She folded the letter and put it in the inside pocket of her coat, against her chest. Lily came out of the back bedroom a few minutes later, dressed and awake. She had been staying in the cabin for 12 days. In that time, she had helped Ruth split firewood, patch the chinking on the north wall with oakum and mortar mix from Hatcher's Hardware, and scrub the floors. She hadn't asked to stay longer, and Ruth hadn't asked her to leave. It had settled into a rhythm. "Today's the hearing," Lily said. "Yes." "You want me to come?" Ruth looked at her. "You don't have to." "I know," Lily said, "but I'm asking if you want me to." Ruth thought about that. Then she nodded. "Yes." They ate oatmeal and toast. Ruth dressed in the gray coat she had left behind at the old house. She had driven back to get it the week before, let herself in with the key she still had, and taken it from the hook by the door where it had been hanging for 2 weeks. No one had been there. The house had smelled like someone else already. At 5:30, they got into the Buick and drove into Harland Springs. The Harland County Courthouse was a 2-story brick building on Main Street with white columns and a cupola on the roof. The parking lot behind it was nearly full. Ruth parked the Buick in the last space and walked around to the front entrance with Lily beside her. Clara Birch was waiting on the steps. She wore a dark suit and carried a leather briefcase. She shook Ruth's hand and nodded to Lily. "Good turnout," Clara said, looking at the lot. "That's good for us." They went inside. The hearing room was on the second floor, a wide, wood-paneled space with rows of benches like church pews and a raised platform at the front where the 5 zoning board members sat behind a long table. The room was nearly full. Ruth recognized a few faces from town: Joanne from the diner, Coy Hatcher in the back row, a man she thought might be Martin Tiller in the front. Douglas Vane sat in the 3rd row on the left, wearing a dark suit, his lawyer beside him. Ruth, Lily, and Clara sat in the 2nd row on the right. At 6 o'clock, Martin Tiller, a man in his 70s with white hair and bifocals on a chain around his neck, stood at the center of the board table and called the hearing to order. "We are here," he said, "to consider a petition filed by Vane Land Holdings LLC to reclassify 2,400 acres along the County Road 4 corridor from agricultural residential to managed forestry and commercial corridor. The petitioner has the floor." Douglas Vane's lawyer, Andrew Murphy, the same name from the letter, stood and walked to a podium in the center aisle. He was a man in his 50s, polished, calm. He spoke for 12 minutes about sustainable timber management, economic development, infrastructure planning, and the long-term good of the county. He used words like corridor optimization and land use efficiency. He did not mention Ruth or Parcel 14B by name. When he finished, Martin Tiller thanked him and asked if anyone wished to speak in opposition. Clara Birch stood. "The landowners of Parcel 14B oppose this petition and wish to be heard." Tiller nodded. "Proceed." Clara walked to the podium. She set a folder on the lectern and opened it. "Parcel 14B," she said, "is 11 acres on County Road 4, owned by Ruth Macklin, who inherited the property from her father, Earl Macklin, in 1989. The deed is recorded and valid. The petitioner has suggested that there are title defects. There are none. I have filed certified copies of the original survey, the 1950 amended plat, and the 1989 deed with the board, and they are available for your review." She paused and looked at the 5 board members. "The real issue here," Clara continued, "is not land use, it's leverage. The petitioner wants Parcel 14B because it has spring-fed creek frontage that his other parcels lack. He has made multiple offers to purchase. Those offers have been declined. This rezoning petition is an attempt to devalue the property and force a sale." Murphy stood. "Objection. Ms. Birch is mischaracterizing. This is a public hearing, not a trial," Tiller said mildly. "There are no objections. Sit down, Mr. Murphy." Murphy sat. Clara continued. "I would like to invite Mrs. Ruth Macklin to speak to the board about her father and the history of this property." She stepped back from the podium. Ruth stood. Her legs felt unsteady. Lily reached out and squeezed her hand once, quick, then let go. Ruth walked to the podium. She looked out at the room, at the faces in the benches, at Coy Hatcher in the back, at Joanne in the 4th row, at Martin Tiller and the other board members watching her with patient, measuring eyes. She took Earl's letter from her coat pocket, unfolded it, and set it on the lectern in front of her. Then she spoke. "My name is Ruth Macklin," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "My father, Earl Macklin, built the cabin on Parcel 14B in 1948. He built it with his own hands. He cut the trees for the beams from the land. He mortared the chimney stone by stone. He lived there for 2 winters while he finished it." She paused. "He gave me that land in 1989 because he knew I loved it. He also knew that after he was gone, people would try to take it. He was right." She looked down at the letter. "My father spent 30 years helping people in this county without asking for anything in return. I didn't know that until 2 weeks ago. But some of you did." She looked up. "If you knew him, you know what kind of man he was. You know he wouldn't want this land turned into a timber corridor or a commercial zone. He wanted it to stay what it is, a place where someone could go when they needed to." She folded the letter and put it back in her pocket. I'm asking you not to let this petition pass, not because I deserve it, but because my father built something worth keeping, and I'm not done taking care of it yet. She stepped back from the podium and returned to her seat. The room was silent. Then from the back row, Coy Hatcher stood. I'd like to speak, he said. Martin Tiller nodded. Go ahead, Coy. Coy walked to the podium. He didn't bring notes. He stood with his hands at his sides and spoke in the same plain, level voice he used behind the counter at the hardware store. Earl Macklin, he said, rewired my mother's house in 1978 when she couldn't afford an electrician. He didn't charge her. He told her to pay it forward when she could. He paused. He built a wheelchair ramp for John Coulter in 1983. He replaced the roof on the Grange Hall in 1985 and wouldn't take $1 for it. He paid the heating bill for the Freemans one winter when Ed Freeman was laid up and couldn't work. He did it anonymously, but Margaret Foss told me years later it was him. Coy looked at the board. I don't know how many people in this county Earl helped. I'd guess dozens, maybe more. He didn't do it for credit. He did it because that's who he was. He looked at Douglas Vane for a moment, then back at the board. If you pass this petition, you're not helping this county. You're helping one man buy land that doesn't belong to him. And you're telling Earl Macklin's daughter that 30 years of her father's work doesn't count for anything. He stepped away from the podium and sat back down. Joanne stood next. I'd like to speak, she said. Tiller nodded. Joanne walked to the podium. She folded her hands in front of her and spoke simply. Earl Macklin came into my diner every Saturday morning for 20 years. He always left a $2 tip on a $5 check. One Saturday in 1987, my register came up $60 short at the end of the day. I was going to have to make it up out of my own pay. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under the diner's front door. There was $60 in it and a note that said, "For the register, no need to mention it." She paused. I knew Earl's handwriting. I never said anything to him about it because I knew he didn't want me to, but I've thought about it every week since. She looked at Ruth. That man's daughter deserves better than this, she said. She sat down. One by one, others stood. A man in his 60s. Earl had helped him replace the transmission in his truck in 1981 and refused payment. A woman in her 50s. Earl had driven her mother to medical appointments in Stonebridge every week for a year when her mother couldn't drive anymore. A man in his 70s. Earl had taught his son how to use a lathe in 1979 and given him a set of chisels when the boy graduated high school. Margaret Fossey stood last. Earl Macklin, she said, paid for my husband's funeral in 1984 when we didn't have the money. He did it through the funeral home so I wouldn't know. The director told me 10 years later. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. I have held Earl's papers at the Grange Hall for 30 years because he asked me to. I have watched Douglas Vane try to buy that land for just as long. Earl told me in 1989 that Vane would try to take it after he was gone, and that I should help Ruth if she ever came back. She looked at the zoning board. I'm asking you to help her now. She sat down. The room was silent. Martin Tiller looked at the other 4 board members. They leaned in and spoke quietly among themselves for 2 minutes. Then Tiller straightened and addressed the room. The board will take a 15-minute recess to deliberate, he said. We'll reconvene at 7:15. The board members stood and filed out through a side door. Ruth sat in the pew with her hands folded in her lap. Lily sat beside her. Clara Birch leaned over and said quietly, "That was good. We'll know soon." Douglas Vane and his lawyer did not move. Vane sat very still, looking at the empty podium. At 7:15, the board returned. Martin Tiller stood. The board has reviewed the petition, he said, and heard public comment. By a vote of 4-1, the petition to reclassify the County Road 4 corridor is denied. The room exhaled. Tiller continued. The board finds that the petitioner has not demonstrated sufficient need for reclassification and that the current agricultural residential designation serves the public interest. This decision is final and recorded as of today's date. He tapped the gavel once. Douglas Vane stood, spoke briefly to his lawyer, and walked out of the room without looking at Ruth. Ruth sat very still. She felt Lily's hand on her shoulder. She heard Clara Birch say, "It's over. You won." She nodded. She stood and turned and saw Coy Hatcher and Joanne and Margaret Foss and the others, a dozen people, maybe more, watching her from the benches. Joanne came up to her first. She put her hand on Ruth's arm and said, "Your father would be proud." Coy nodded from the back. Margaret smiled. One by one they left, filing out into the cold November night. Ruth walked out last with Lily and Clara beside her. On the courthouse steps, Clara shook her hand. "You're clear," Clara said. "The deed stands. The zoning stays. Vane has no grounds left." She paused. "Your father planned well." Ruth nodded. "Thank you." Clara smiled. "Send me a postcard when you get the place fixed up." She walked to her car and drove away. Ruth and Lily stood on the steps for a moment in the cold. "You did it," Lily said. Ruth looked out at Main Street, at the hardware store across the way, dark now, and the diner with its sign glowing warm in the window, and the post office on the corner. "We did it," Ruth said. They got into the Buick and drove back to the cabin. Spring came slow to Harland County. By March, the frost had lifted, and the ground had softened enough to work. Ruth spent 2 weeks patching the chinking on the north wall, mixing lime mortar by hand in a plastic bucket, working the oakum into the gaps with a putty knife. Lily helped, standing on a step stool to reach the higher courses, her hands white with lime dust. In April, Coy Hatcher came out to the cabin with a man named Vernon Price, a retired clockmaker from Stone Ridge. Vernon looked at the tall case clock frame and the works wrapped in cloth and nodded once. "I can clean this," he said. "It'll take me a month, maybe 6 weeks, but it'll run." Ruth told him to take his time. By May, the rocking chair had been sanded and oiled. Ruth had done it herself. 220 grit paper, 3 coats of tung oil, working slowly, the way Earl's letter had told her to. She set it on the porch and sat in it on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and watched the sun come up over the tree line. Lily had stayed. She had found work at the diner. Joanne had hired her in December, part-time at first, then full. She still slept in the back bedroom. Ruth had offered to help her find a place of her own, but Lily had shaken her head and said, "I like it here." Ruth understood. In June, a young man came up the lane in a beat-up Ford Ranger with a tarp over the truck bed. He was maybe 19, thin, with the look of someone who had been sleeping in his truck. He knocked on the door and asked if there was any work he could do for a meal. Ruth looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Can you split wood?" "Yes, ma'am." She pointed to the shed. "There's an axe and a maul in there. Split what's in the pile by the back wall. When you're done, come inside." He worked for 2 hours. Ruth made sandwiches, ham and cheese, the same kind Joanne had given her that first week, and set them on the table with a jar of water. The young man came in, washed his hands at the sink, and ate without speaking. When he finished, Ruth said, "What's your name?" "Cole. Cole Whitmer." "Where are you headed?" "I don't know yet." Ruth nodded. She thought about a young woman named Lily who had shown up 6 months ago with a backpack and a broken car. She thought about Earl and the envelope under the diner door and the wheelchair ramp and the heating bill paid anonymously. "There's a shed out back," Ruth said. "It's got a cot and a space heater. You can stay there tonight if you need to. If you want to stay longer, we'll figure out work." Cole looked at her. "Why?" "Because someone did it for me once," Ruth said, "and because I can." He stayed. By the end of June, the cabin had a new roof. Tin, installed by a crew from Stone Ridge that Clara Birch had recommended, paid for with the matured savings bonds from the jars in the hidden room. The old Franklin stove had been cleaned and resealed. The front door hinges had been oiled. The porch boards had been replaced where they'd gone soft. On the 4th of July, Ruth invited Coy and Joanne and Margaret Fossey and Vernon Price to the cabin for dinner. Lily cooked. Cole set up a folding table on the porch. Ruth brought out the cherry rocking chair and the blanket chest and the tall case clock, now reassembled and running, its pendulum swinging steady in the main room. They ate fried chicken and cornbread and green beans and pie. They sat on the porch as the light faded and the fireflies came out in the clearing. Coy told a story about Earl and a chainsaw and a stubborn hickory stump. Joanne laughed. Margaret refilled the coffee. Vernon looked at the clock through the window and said, "That's fine work." Earl knew what he was doing. Ruth sat in the rocking chair and looked out at the clearing and the tree line and the darkening sky. She thought about the letter in the envelope on the shelf inside. "When you stand on this land, I want you to know that you are standing on something that no one can take from you unless you let them." She had not let them. August came hot and still. Ruth woke early one morning and walked out to the clearing with a cup of coffee. The air was thick and soft, the kind of air that holds sound close. A crow called from the big oak at the lane. The garden Lily had planted in May was thick with tomatoes and squash and beans, climbing a trellis Cole had built from locust poles. She sat on the porch steps and looked at the cabin. It was still small. It was still old, but it was sound. The chinking was tight. The roof was new. The door swung smooth on oiled hinges. Inside, the tall case clock ticked steady. The rocking chair sat by the window. The blanket chest, opened now, held quilts and linens and the letters Earl had written, each one folded carefully and kept. Ruth had thought, in those first weeks after she arrived, that she had come here because she had nowhere else to go. And that had been true. But it was not the whole truth. She had come here because her father had built a place for her, not just a cabin. A place. Something that would hold her when everything else fell away. And she had stayed because she understood now what he had been doing all those years. Not just saving money or building furniture or oiling hinges. He had been teaching her how to build a life that mattered, how to help people without asking for credit, how to fix what was broken and leave it better than you found it. She finished her coffee and stood. Inside, Lily was awake, making breakfast. Cole was at the table reading a book Coy had loaned him about carpentry. The clock ticked. The stove ticked. Ruth set her cup in the sink and looked around the room. Home isn't where you end up, she thought. It's where you stop running and decide to fix what's broken. She had stopped running. She had fixed what needed fixing. And now, every morning, she woke up in the cabin her father had built in 1948. And she did the same thing he had done. She took care of what needed taking care of, and she helped the people who showed up at her door, and she kept the hinges oiled and the fire fed and the door open. It was enough. It was more than enough. Evening came slow. Ruth sat on the porch in the cherry rocking chair, a quilt over her lap, watching the light fade from gold to amber to blue. Lily and Cole had gone into town for groceries. The cabin behind her was quiet except for the tick of the clock and the low crackle of the fire in the stove. On the windowsill beside the door, she had arranged a few small things. The brass key from the deed box, a photograph of Earl standing in front of the half-built cabin in 1948, the ceramic rooster from her mother's recipe box, and the first letter Earl had written, still in its envelope, creased soft from handling. She rocked gently, the chair moving with a rhythm she had learned by heart. A car came up the lane, the Buick, Lily driving, Cole in the passenger seat. They unloaded bags and carried them inside, moving quietly. And after a moment, Lily came back out and sat on the steps. "You need anything?" Lily asked. "No," Ruth said. "I'm fine." Lily nodded and went back inside. Ruth sat in the rocking chair and watched the last light leave the sky. The fireflies came out, drifting through the clearing like sparks from a fire that had no source. The air smelled like cut grass and wood smoke and the faint sweetness of the wild roses that grew along the lane. Inside, the clock struck 8. The sound was clear and true. Ruth pulled the quilt closer and rocked, and the cabin held her the way it had always been meant to, steady, square, built to last. The porch light came on behind her, warm and yellow, spilling out onto the steps and into the clearing. Someone turned a page inside. The fireflies drifted. The world settled. And Ruth Macklin, at 71, sat in the chair her father had built for her when she was 12, on the land he had given her in her own name, and rocked gently in the stillness, and was home.